Section 4. Obesity. Christine Fowler is a nutritionist. In the following talk, you will hear her discuss the rise in the number of people who are overweight. Before you start listening, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40.
The past 20 years have witnessed a dramatic growth in the number of people in the Western world who are overweight. This byproduct of prosperity is so serious that it's become a major health issue. In England, 53% of adult women are overweight, while the figure for men is about 63%. Studies carried out in the 1980s showed much lower levels than this. And the problem gets worse the older people get. Whereas just over a quarter of the young are overweight, it afflicts an alarming 68% of women and 3/4 of men among those aged 55 to 64. The overall increase in the weight of the average person is partially the result of changes in lifestyle, and it has serious consequences for individuals and society. A person's weight increases when their food intake is greater than their energy output. The body stores the extra energy in the form of fat, whereas many people today would prefer to be slim than to have a more rounded figure. Until fairly recently in human history, it was an advantage to have body fat. Before humans started to grow their own crops and domesticate animals, food supplies were far less reliable, and famine was an unavoidable part of life. When famine came along, those who had more body fat were more likely to overcome the difficult period than slim people. The thin ones would either die in the famine, or their health would be affected and they would have fewer children. The ones who weren't underweight would then, in turn, be more likely to produce children who shared this tendency to gain weight when times were good. This genetic trait has been passed on through evolution, so that today many people have a natural tendency to gain weight. However, in the absence of recurrent famines, this is no longer such a good thing, particularly when you consider that people today do far less physical work than they used to. The easy availability of food with a high sugar and fat content, coupled with inadequate physical activity, lies at the root of the general increase in weight in the population. Most of those suffering from excess body weight would go a long way towards solving their problem if they regularly did moderately vigorous exercise. For instance, 30 minutes per day of swimming, cycling, or brisk walking. So what exactly is the problem if a person weighs more than they should? Firstly, this can put too much strain on the joints such as knees and ankles. The health consequences of having excess body fat depend on what part of the body the fat is found on. Fat on the abdominal area is often associated with diabetes and heart disease, whereas there's no apparent connection between those conditions and having fat on the thighs and hips. Being overweight can also give rise to problems apart from those of physical health. In childhood, even more so than later life, people need to feel that they belong. Children who are rejected and ostracized by their classmates because they are overweight and not fit may develop low self-esteem. Although scientists are still unsure why some people gain weight more easily than others, it's clear that the right food, together with regular exercise, is the only way to lose weight and not put it back on. To lose weight, a person should avoid certain foods, but also eat more fruit, vegetables, and cereal foods such as bread, pasta, and rice. Rather than focusing on what people should not eat, the focus should be on healthy food that people should eat. Losing weight doesn't mean being on a monotonous diet. In fact, it's recommended that everyone eats 30 different foods a day. A problem with many diets and weight loss programs is that they tend to make extravagant promises of rapid weight loss with very little exercise or no exercise at all. It is in fact not healthy to lose more than a kilo per month. But some losing weight at that rate run the risk of losing muscle, whereas a realistic, healthy weight loss program needs to include regular exercise. And for those who've repeatedly been unsuccessful in the attempt to reduce their weight, it's better to accept that they have a larger body than a fashion model, as well as to make some changes in their diet and to do regular exercise. They may not live longer, but at least they'll enjoy their time more.
That is the end of section 4. You now have 30 seconds to complete your answers.
Section 4. In this section, you'll hear a lecture on the coral reef. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Do you fancy diving in a wonderful world of coral reef? Green sponges, colourful fish, and red crabs? It is a rich garden beneath the waves. But how much do you know about the corals? Are they animals or plants? What are the threats to coral reefs? Today, Mr. Tim Harford, Executive Director of the Coral Reef Alliance, is going to introduce the facts about coral reef.
Good afternoon, everyone. Coral reefs are one of nature's most magnificent creations. They are filled with thousands of unique and valuable plants and animals. Over 1/4 of all marine species depend on healthy coral reefs. Humans also depend on coral reefs. These marine ecosystems are the primary source of food and income for millions of people, a vast repository of valuable chemical compounds and medicines, and a natural wave barrier that protect beaches and coastlines from waves and storms. Coral is actually the ecoskeletons of coral polyps. Made of limestone, these skeletons build up over time, forming the reef. New corals are born each April. At a certain hour, on a certain night, mature corals suddenly release clouds of eggs and sperm into the sea. After the fertilized eggs take root on the sea floor, they can grow up to 15 centimeters per year. Coral reefs are present in the waters of over 100 countries. These are warm, 18 to 29 degrees Celsius, shallow, sunny regions, primarily between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. Only clear, warm salt water can support a coral reef. And because sunlight is crucial to the reef's survival, the water must also be shallow. The algae that grow on coral provide much of the coral's food. In deeper water, algae cannot get the sunlight they need to grow. Most coral reefs are in the tropics because natural conditions there are perfect. In their modern form, coral reefs have thrived on Earth for over 50 million years. In recent years, however, more than 11% of the world's reefs have been lost, with another 16% severely damaged during the El Niño event in 1998. Up to 32% of coral reefs may be destroyed by human activities in the next 30 years if we do not take action now. Corals and coral reefs are extremely sensitive. Slight changes in the reef environment may have detrimental effects on the health of entire coral colonies. These changes may be due to a variety of factors. One of the greatest threats to coral reefs is human expansion or development. As human population increases, so does the harvest of resources from the sea. Due to overfishing, reef fish populations have been greatly decreased in some areas of the world. The removal of large numbers of reef fish has caused the coral reef ecosystems to become unbalanced. As we know, corals are also very popular as decorations. A large amount of the most healthy corals are selected by commercial collectors. They sell the corals to the souvenir shops, where a large number of tourists wait to purchase them as decorations or souvenirs. Coral reefs also receive much damage from both commercial and private vessels. The leakage of fuels into the water and the occurrences of spills by large tankers are extremely damaging to local corals. Although much of the coral reef's degradation is directly blamed on human impact, there are several natural disturbances which cause significant damage to coral reefs. The most recognized of these events are hurricanes or typhoons, which bring powerful waves to the tropics. These storm waves cause large corals to break apart and scatter fragments about the reefs. Home to a diverse community of creatures, coral reefs are underwater treasure chests of color and activity. Predators and prey swim and crawl along the coral in nature's never-ending dance of life and death. This lively, fascinating world beneath the waves is just waiting to be explored. That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 4. You will hear a talk on the subject of marketing. First, you'll have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Last week we looked at some general principles associated with marketing, and today I'd like to look at some of those points in a little more detail. So what is marketing? Or, put another way, what does the term marketing mean? Many people think of it simply as the process of selling and advertising, and this is hardly surprising when every day we are bombarded with television adverts, mail shots and telephone sales. But selling and advertising are only two functions of marketing. In fact, marketing, more than any other business function, deals with customers. So perhaps the simplest definition is this one. Marketing is the delivery of customer value and satisfaction at a profit. In other words, finding customers, keeping those customers happy, and making money out of the process. The most basic concept underlying marketing is the concept of human needs. These include basic physical needs for things like food, as well as warmth and safety. And marketers don't invent these needs. They're a basic part of our human makeup. So besides physical needs, there are also social needs. For instance, the need to belong and to be wanted. And in addition to social needs, we have the need for knowledge and self-expression, often referred to as individual needs. As societies evolve, members of that society start to see things not so much in terms of what they need, but in terms of what they want. And when people have enough money, these wants become demands. Now, it's important for the managers in a company to understand what their customers want if they are going to create effective marketing strategies. So there are various ways of doing this. One way, at supermarkets for instance, is to interview customers while they're doing their shopping. They can be asked about their buying preferences, and then the results of the survey can be analysed. This provides reliable feedback on which to base future marketing strategies. It's also quite normal for top executives from department stores to spend a day or two each month visiting stores and mixing freely with the public as if they were ordinary customers to get an idea of customer behaviour. Another way to get information from customers is to give them something. For instance, some fast food outlets give away vouchers in magazines or on the street that entitle customers to get part of their meal for nothing. As well as being a good way of attracting customers into the restaurants to spend their money, it also allows the managers to get a feel for where to advertise and which age groups to target. Another strategy employed at some well-known theme parks, such as Disneyland, is for top managers to spend at least one day in their career touring the park dressed as Mickey Mouse or some other cartoon character. This provides them with the perfect opportunity to survey the scene and watch the customers without being noticed. Okay, well, we mentioned customer satisfaction at the beginning of this lecture, and I'd like to return briefly to that as it relates to what we've just been talking about. If the performance of a product falls short of the customer's expectations, the buyer is going to be dissatisfied. In other words, if the product you buy isn't as good as you'd expected, then the chances are you'll be unhappy about it. If, on the other hand, performance matches expectations and the product you buy is as good as you expected, then generally speaking, the buyer is satisfied. But smart companies should aim one step higher. They should aim to delight customers by promising only what they can be sure of delivering, and then delivering much more than they promised. So then, if, as sometimes happens, performance is better than expected, the buyer is delighted and is twice as likely to come back to the store. Now let's move on to look at the role of advertising.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 4. You will hear a lecture on the subject of population growth and decline around the world. First, you will have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40. Now, you may be wondering why I've entitled this lecture Decline of the White Man. Well, my lecture today is concerned with the population growth and decline around the world, as well as migratory movements of people. But first of all, it's important for us to cast our minds back several hundred years to the time of the great explorers and the founding of America. When Columbus discovered America in the 15th century, it sparked off the imagination of many people. Europe at the time had reached a level of technology and social stability that allowed them to explore the world, and in doing so they realized that the world was much bigger than they'd previously imagined, with vast areas of largely uninhabited land, such as the newly discovered America. Moreover, overcrowding in European countries, together with a desire for economic expansion, led many people to look to the newly discovered lands. However, not only was America sparsely inhabited, it was rich in natural resources, such as iron ore, coal, and tin. In other words, it meant that the people of Europe could increase their already significant wealth, and in doing so, increase their domination over the world. So it was that many thousands of people migrated to the new land. Over time, of course, America rose to become an economically very powerful nation, a superpower in fact, and as a superpower, they now dominate world trade. But let us come back to modern-day Europe for a moment. What we see happening today is a rise in the number of educated people who are keen on developing well-paid careers, and whilst this in itself is not a problem, young people are marrying much later in life and having fewer, if any, children. This is leading to a decline in birth rates. So what many Western countries, not just Europe, are suffering from is an aging population. By an aging population, I mean that there are too many old people who don't work and therefore don't contribute to the economy. In contrast, there are far too few young people to work and create wealth for the country. Now, over the past several months, I've been involved in some research with a number of colleagues of mine from different universities around the world. As part of our research, we've been involved in conducting a demographic survey when we attempted to track and catalogue the movement of the world's population. Now, if you take a look at this chart I've prepared, if I can just get the machine working. Yes, there we are. Okay, now by looking at this chart you can clearly see that in many countries there are fewer young people than there are old people. This means that the economic burden of caring for the elderly is placed on the shoulders of a few young working people, not just governments. In the past, of course, fewer old people would have been cared for by a far greater number of young people. Today, the situation has reversed, putting a huge financial strain on young people. Now, let's turn our attention to Asia. In Asia, there are countries such as India and China that have a vast population. This means that labor is very cheap. So, two things are happening. One is that more and more companies are outsourcing work to Asia. In other words, they manufacture their goods in Asian countries where wages are low and sell them in Western countries for inflated amounts. This is good for Asian countries, of course, because it means they can develop their economies. But as Asian people grow wealthier, many decide to go overseas to study, or even immigrate in some cases. Don't forget that many countries need skilled people such as engineers and nurses. So what we are witnessing today is a massive shift in the world's population from Eastern countries to Western countries. Now, if you take a look at this second chart I've prepared, you'll see that in 1999 alone, over 250,000 people moved from Asia to Western countries such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and, of course, here in Britain. And over 80% of migrants were university students. But if we look back to the beginning of the 1990s, we can see a gradual rise in the number of migrants, from somewhere in the region of 45,000 in 1990 through to 136,000 in 1995 and 200,000 12 months later. And based on the present rate of expansion, we estimate that by the year 2010, somewhere in the region of 750,000 people will migrate from Asian countries to Western countries every year. Asians, though, are generally far more family-oriented than Western people are. Obviously, this is merely a cultural difference. But what it does mean is that they are more likely to have more children and at a younger age. So what this means is that as the white population decreases, the Asian population increases. Therefore, by the end of the century, it may well be an Asian country that has the economic power. However, do not be misled into thinking that this is a modern-day phenomenon. It's not. It's simply the natural ebb and flow of populations. It's a universal law of nature that certain populations grow in strength as others weaken. It happens just as much in the animal kingdom as it does in the world that humans live. Therefore, it's wrong to assume that we should do something to change what is happening or try to prevent it in some way. What we should do, however, is simply try to understand the forces involved, and through our investigations, try to gain a better understanding of the world in which we live. That concludes the lecture for today. But if any of you would like to follow up on some points I've mentioned here today, then I've put together quite a comprehensive reading list for you. That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 4. You will hear a student talking about a survey conducted among people of different age groups to find out how architecture may affect people's lives. First, you'll have some time to look at questions 31 to 37. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 37. My group has been doing a project on the importance of architecture in people's lives and whether it has any impact on the lives of people in general. The main part I have played is in the collection of data to find out what effect, if any, various buildings have on people's mood, i.e., whether ugly buildings make people unhappy and whether beautiful buildings do the opposite. We had originally thought of starting measuring people's reactions by using a questionnaire with about 40 questions, which we were going to hand out to people, including students at the university. But we were worried that doing the questionnaire would be too time-consuming for people to fill in, so we gave up the idea. I then asked several of the postgraduate students for advice. One of them came up with the simple idea of showing people images of various buildings from different eras and styles instead of giving out the questionnaire, and asking them to indicate how they felt on a scale of 1 to 5 about the images, where 1 was unhappy and 5 was very happy. People would also be given the option of not saying what they felt. Using the scale meant that it would be much simpler to record people's reactions. I decided to follow this advice, and so the first stage was to collect a large number of images. I used Google to print off colour images of views of houses and apartment blocks where people live, and different types of buildings where they work. I started with about 30 or 40 and reduced them to 10 images. Media resources in the Amory building at the Judd Street branch of the university helped me produce the final images. I had them blown up to A4 size, and we used colour rather than black and white to make the detail on the images clearer. We made 5 sets of images, and for protection when handling, we pasted the images onto hard card. Then, using a machine to wrap them with plastic, we laminated the cards. 5 of us targeted different age groups. We went to a local school where we obtained permission to ask a group of teenagers between 11 and 18. We also asked a sample of the general public, including tourists from all over the world, as they exited the Tate Modern in London, what they thought. We aimed to ask people from different age groups, namely 20 to 40 and 50 and over. What our group learnt most from the project was first of all the value of teamwork, and secondly, we found that we had to appoint a leader to stop us pulling in different directions and falling apart, so this turned out to be an invaluable lesson for all of us. Before you hear the rest of the talk, you'll have some time to look at questions 38 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 38 to 40. As to the findings, for us they proved intriguing. In the end, the sample consisted of 311 respondents. I thought initially that people wouldn't be interested in taking part. With the youngest age group, their reaction was very mixed. It was clear that the youngest group had no pattern of preference at all, as they frequently gave no reaction to the pictures. For the 20 to 40 age group, we found that they tended to score more in the middle range, around 3. We found that out of the 3 groups, the most likely to be favourably affected by the images, that is, they were more likely to score the images as 5, were those aged 50 and above. And nobody in this age group failed to say what their reaction was, which was unique for the 3 groups. In total, I have to say that about 71 people indicated that they had no reaction at all to an image. Our general conclusion is that we need to find out more about why people react as they do, by perhaps giving them a chance to give reasons for their decisions. I would like to finish there and give my teammates a chance to add anything I have missed, or take any questions or suggestions. That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.